Starting us off at number 5, we have fireworks. Now, fireworks are a pretty big deal in China. They were originally invented in medieval China during the 9th century in an attempt to scare away evil spirits. Globally, they are recognized as one of the 4 great inventions of ancient China and were derived from a natural application of gunpowder. Every year, over $1.2 billion worth of fireworks are exported to the United States alone purely for their 4th of July celebrations. So it kind of makes you wonder about a particular Chinese law that forbids householders from storing more than a ton of explosives in their basements. I mean, that kind of makes sense until you realise that for this law to even exist, there must have been a pretty high number of people storing over a ton of explosives in their own homes. That is a hell of a lot of fireworks. Bringing it in at number 4, we have the "Don't Eat My Wife" law. Okay, now this one is a little bit of a head scratcher, so just bear with me. There is an ancient obscure law that dates back to ancient China, but is still technically in force to this day. Cannibalism is regularly detailed throughout Chinese history and was often practiced as an obscure type of culinary appreciation. Even executioners would regularly eat the hearts and brains of criminals that they had recently dispatched. So, a law that states a Chinese man can't eat another man's wife intentionally, as in part of a meal, kind of makes you question what the hell was going on. I mean, does that mean he can eat her if she's not part of a prepared meal? And what if he finds himself eating unintentionally? Is that still illegal? Next up at number 3, we have the emergency response law. This is where we take a little bit of a serious turn and take a look at how China's more recent policies have stemmed the flow of information in their own country. As we covered before, China heavily relies on state censorship to stem the flow of media information that their citizens can get their hands on. A lot of things are just straight up blocked on China's internet, and one particular law, dubbed the emergency response law, was sold as preventing the spread of false information during times of disaster. With the intention of stopping people from straight up lying and spreading false information during emergency situations, what China has actually done is completely muzzle the media from providing their citizens with critical life-saving information. This means that coverage of industrial accidents such as factory explosions or even natural disasters such as earthquakes are rarely reported, with the fear of provoking social unrest. They literally turn a blind eye and people's lives are sadly lost. Closing it in at number 2, we have the one-child policy. First introduced in 1979 as part of China's family planning policy, the one-child law was incredibly controversial on a global scale. Before the 1960s, the government encouraged families to have as many children as possible, and China's population grew very rapidly. After that, Chairman Mao's blueprint of the one-child limitation was put into action in fears of an overpopulation crisis. According to the Chinese government, over 400 million births were prevented in the first decade. Families were physically prevented from having more than one child, with some couples paying thousands for IVF treatment so they could have twins, which were legal. Governments imposed fines for any violations, and local commissions carried out inspections to make sure no children were being hidden by a household. It's crazy stuff, and although recently the Chinese government has changed its one-child policy to a two-child policy, the memory of the one-child era still lingers. And finally, at our number 1 spot is the presidential term limit. Okay, we've covered this one before, but it still deserves to be at the number 1 placement, purely for the fact that any democratic society should offer a limitation to leadership, because if not, we essentially just end up getting a dictator. In March 2018, the National People's Congress passed a constitutional amendment that officially put an end to presidential and vice presidential term limits. This formally allows now head of state Xi Jinping to stay in power beyond 2023, and more than likely forever. Generally, Xi Jinping is a pretty chill dude and holds an incredibly popular vote throughout the majority of China after his anti-corruption campaign won him huge popularity with the Chinese people. But the point is, if things go wrong and that popularity changes, the Chinese people now no longer have a vote out. Interesting. At number 5, Bangar, the legally haunted town. Yeah, okay, while this number 5 point may potentially water down the real world implications of the rest of this list, it still doesn't make it any less hauntingly awesome. Yes, this law shouldn't be illegal, like you'll see differently with some of our later points, but come on, we had to talk about it. Enter Bangar, a small village in Rajasthan at the edge of the Scariest Tiger Reserve. Famous for its historically morbid Bangar fort, this village is considered to be the most haunted place in the entire country. Why? Well, according to local folklore, a wizard had once cursed the town, leading to its untimely demise. The wizard was obsessed with the fort they had built in the centre of the village, which he took as his own home. So much so that he commanded that no house should ever be taller than his. He warned that the moment the shadow of a taller house touches his own, the whole town would be destroyed. Well, of course, Ajab Singh, grandson of a local warlord, ignored this warning and he got to building. They don't call it a ghost town for no reason. Legally speaking, people are strictly prohibited to enter the village before sunrise and after sunset due to its, ghosts. Coming in at number 4, India's stance on suicide. Yeah, this one is a little bit of a head scratcher. Under section 309 of the Indian Penal Code, the survivor of suicide would be liable to face a jail term of up to 1 year and a massive fine, despite their own fragile mental state. The suicide rate in India is staggeringly huge at 135,000 people per year, accounting for 17% of the world's suicide rate. Most of this accounts to family problems or prolonged mental illness, but a high proportion included marriage-related issues. The fact that the government would legally punish the survivors of suicide is something that the global community found difficult to understand. Thankfully though, this law was finally repealed in 2014 after public outcry, but sadly is still socially enforced in some regions to this day. Next up at number 3, the annoyance law. Literally a law that is based on an individual's level of annoyance. Sound crazy? Yes, because it is. According to section 294 of the Indian Penal Code, whoever to the annoyance of others does any obscene act in any public place or sings, recites or utters any obscene song, ballad or words in or near any public place shall be punished with imprisonment or a fine or both. Let's just unpack that a little bit then, shall we? In layman's terms, if someone finds what you're doing annoying, be it tap dancing, sitting on a yoga ball, kissing your partner in public, then you could be thrown in jail. The crazier part is that the penal code doesn't clearly define actually what the obscenity is, meaning in all legality you could be thrown in jail for smiling at someone the wrong way. Coming in at number 2, marital rape in India. In India, rape is the 4th most common crime against women, which has had the majority of decent Indian people asking, why isn't marital rape counted as the same criminal offence in India? Because sadly, for the sake of many young women and newlywed wives in the country, the law has failed them at the expense of their own social stigmas. While most of the developed world has criminalised marital rape, there is sadly no such law in India. Home Affairs Minister at the time, Haribhai Chowdhury, publicly stated that marital rape can't be made a criminal offence in India because of a high illiteracy rate, poverty, extreme religious beliefs, and the very sanctity of marriage. The social stigma attached has also led to many of these horrific crimes being unreported, despite the fact that they wouldn't even be recognised as a crime in India, sadly. And finally, at our number 1 spot, homosexuality laws. In Indian civil society as well as the government, homosexuality is sadly a taboo subject. Under section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, sex with persons of the same gender is considered punishable by law. Despite LGBT activists trying to repeal this law and even taking it to the Delhi High Court, it was eventually overturned completely by the Supreme Court of India. Wait a minute though, just hold up there. Also, I've got a new t-shirt on. Coincidence? I think not, because at the time of this recording, homosexuality in India was very much illegal under the Indian Penal Code. But, and this is a very big exposition, as of September the 6th, 2018, India's Supreme Court has struck down a colonial era law criminalising consensual gay sex, overturning more than 150 years of anti-LGBT legislation. The court announced the landmark verdict in Delhi as joyous crowds cheered and human rights activists hugged one another. It's a major victory for India's LGBT community as well as the worldwide community, and we're happy to announce this victory for our number 1 point. It's moot. Great stuff.
Number 5. There is no chewing gum allowed in Singapore. For many, chewing gum is a great way to keep your mouth occupied and to help you relax while experiencing minty, fresh flavors and keeping your breath acceptable for general company. The problem with gum, of course, is that once it has lost its flavor, it can be difficult to find a place to dispose of it. This is the story of how a few bad faith chewers changed government policy and made mastication on public transit illegal. In 1983, Singapore's Minister of National Development proposed a ban for chewing gum due to the large number of vandals who were leaving their spent gum on elevator buttons, keyholes, and even mailboxes. Gum left in public areas increased the cost of cleaning and would often damage the cleaning equipment, leading to even more increased spending. The Prime Minister at the time did not go forward with the ban as he considered it too drastic, but that all changed in 1987. The country had just spent $5 billion on a new mass rapid transit system, the largest public project in the history of the country. Vandals began causing costly delays by putting used chewing gum over the sensors of the automatic train doors, causing lengthy and costly delays. Rather than suffer through a slow rush hour, the new Prime Minister decided to enforce the chewing gum ban. This ban made it illegal to import or sell chewing gum in the country, with anyone caught importing the substance into the country being subject to thousands of dollars in fines and even jail time. The ban was eventually amended to allow for special medicinal gums that could be prescribed by a dentist, but the idea of someone ending up in prison over some hubba bubba is disturbing to say the least. Number 4. India's locust law. Locusts are grasshopper-like creatures that are capable of causing devastation on a biblical scale. Although they often lead solitary lives, during droughts, the creatures come together as a group to form giant swarms that can travel up to 81 miles per day. These swarms can quickly devastate crops, causing famine and death in the regions they inhabit. Keeping these bugs at bay is such an important issue that India has a law that ensures they have all hands on deck in the event of a major infestation. The old law states that any young man over the age of 14 must report for duty and do everything in his power to fight the locusts when summoned. Failure to report for duty can result in a fine or even imprisonment, meaning that any 14-year-old must choose in a time of crisis between prison and facing the swarm. This law is so old that it states that the citizens will be notified by the beating of a drum in the event of a locust invasion. But its age does not mean it doesn't have the possibility of being enforced, as the rule was seriously considered back in 2020 by the Indian government when the country was overrun by several giant swarms of the hungry creatures. Number 3. Sharing passwords in Tennessee, USA. There was a time when Netflix seemed revolutionary, with a wealth of content you could access with the click of a button, eliminating the need for expensive physical media. In the years since, several companies have gotten in on the streaming action, with new services popping up every day. In order to keep up to date with the gang from Stranger Things, the adorable antics of Baby Yoda, and the even cuter antics of Ted Lasso, you have to be subscribed to 3 different services, and the price of this can add up quickly. One of the solutions to this is to do what I never could: entertain friends. With these friends, you could pool your funds to subscribe to multiple services. While this may seem innocent enough, you could face dire consequences if this is how you do it in the American state of Tennessee. After pressure from the recording industry lobby in an effort they claim is to prevent internet piracy, Tennessee passed a law that makes sharing passwords for any entertainment service illegal. This includes Netflix, Disney+, Spotify, you name it. If you are caught engaging in password sharing, you could be subject to a fine of $2,500 and up to a year in prison. This is the only state in the country that has this law so far, but the idea of citizens being so severely punished for simply sharing the resources they've paid for, and the precedent it sets, is more than enough to make my skin crawl. Number 2. Taking a selfie with the Buddha in Sri Lanka. While traveling abroad, it can be difficult to keep track of cultural differences that could inadvertently result in you insulting the people of your host country. While some of these can lead to amusing misunderstandings, others could result in your ignorance putting you in a foreign prison. Such is the case in our next entry. In the country of Sri Lanka, over 70% of the population practice Buddhism as their religion and take any perceived slight against their chosen prophet very seriously. It is considered a great sign of disrespect to turn your back on a statue of the Buddha, Buddha, and if caught doing this, you could receive a very stern talking to, or in some cases, jail time. Something that has happened to tourists traveling abroad in the country a few times is that they have tried to take a photo with a statue, and rather than following the rules of having someone else take the photo while they turn towards or stand next to the statue, they take a selfie instead. This of course results in a photo where the subject is standing in front of the statue with their back turned to the stone figure. While this usually results in someone simply making you delete the photo, there was a case where a French couple took a photo with a Buddha statue while pretending to give the prophet a kiss. They were charged and convicted soon after. So, when traveling abroad, make sure to learn a bit about the local customs, or you could unexpectedly find yourself in a foreign prison with no clue what you did to end up there. Number 1. Reincarnating without permission in China. While we are on the subject of Buddhism, let's talk about this law in China. In a move they claim is to institutionalize management of reincarnation, the Chinese government's State Administration for Religious Affairs has put laws in place that prohibit the Buddhist monks in Tibet from reincarnating without permission. The law states the following. Once an application for a living Buddha's reincarnation has received approval, the management organization at the monastery where the living Buddha is registered, or the corresponding Buddhist association, shall establish a search team to look for the reincarnate soul child, and search affairs shall be carried out under the leadership of the guidance team. No group or individual may without authorization carry out any activities related to searching for or recognizing reincarnating living Buddha soul children. While the idea of your soul's journey after death being subject to government approval is terrifying in its own right, it is believed that the goal of this law is to ensure that when the current Dalai Lama dies, the Chinese government is able to make sure that his successor is someone that they can ensure is loyal to them, which is equally disturbing for its own reasons.